We've got a bunch of crazy high Vegas totals this week. We'll tell you how to navigate that landscape, and we've got some running backs coming back from injury. Before we dive into quarterbacks and our special guest, David Dodds, we're going to pitch it over to Ryan to tell us a little bit about what he sees in those high Vegas odds.
Thanks, Austin. Yeah, it's kind of odd to be kicking off the show here first, so hopefully I do it justice since John is not with us this evening. One thing I noticed doing some of my articles this week is it's kind of a weird slate. We have our fair share of high-scoring games. However, we don't have a lot of them shaping up to be like Rams and Saints last week, which shaped up on paper to be a shootout and certainly was. So we have 5 main slate games that I see at 50 points or more, but only one of those is within a 4-point spread. We have the top 3 teams are all favored. Top 3 team totals, I should say, are all teams favored by double digits. Kansas City by 16 or 16.5, and then both LA teams favored by 10 over their opponents. So all those teams have workhorse running backs. I'm sure we'll be talking about those guys. We also have another team favored by 10, which is Green Bay, who does not have a workforce running back. So that'll be an interesting one when we get to that. Yeah, they may now. We will see.
Tease, yeah.
They haven't yet, but they may. And then we have a number of road favorites, including some that are supposed to be high-scoring teams. We have Atlanta visiting Cleveland, New Orleans at Cincinnati, New England at Tennessee, and the Chargers at Oakland. So you always got to worry about those road favorites. Do they roll like they should, like Vegas says they will, or do the home team sneak up and kind of hold them in check? So it's definitely an interesting week, and it's going to be kind of the key to winning or losing this week is how you plan your players based on your game scripts.
Yeah, I have a hunch that we're going to see some higher than usual cash lines this week. It's going to be one of those weeks where people open up their lineup and go, great, I scored a lot of points. And they'll be like, wait, why didn't I win? So we're going to try to set you guys up to find the highest of those good plays, especially in a week where the average game total in the main slate, according to Vegas, is 48 points. That feels crazy high. So I think running backs are going to be a little bit easier to come by this week with those big spreads, but picking the right one is going to be the key. So we're the Footballguys Daily Fantasy Power Grid. If you haven't checked us out before, I'm Austin Lee, joined by Devin Knotts and Ryan Hester, and special guest, the boss man, David Dodds. David, we're going to get everybody ready for the main slate on DraftKings and FanDuel over the course of the next hour. But I want to kick it to you to talk about some quarterbacks. Where are you looking this week at quarterback?
I think probably on everybody's list in terms of just value, Ryan Fitzpatrick, super cheap, 7,600 on FanDuel. It's 5,900 on DraftKings. So that seems like easy points, easy way to do it. And I suspect that Washington-Tampa Bay game actually could be pretty high scoring anyway. I mean, Washington generally has a defense that can stop the run, so I think you're going to see pass against pass. That's where I'm going to have a lot of my action there. So that's kind of my lineup script there. If that does play out that way, I'll actually have quite a few shares of Alex Smith, and another reason I'll laugh about that, but he's highly underowned. And this is kind of
no way. I'm sorry, David, but there's no way.
This is the kind of week that he actually could. I mean, if you kind of run it back, I mean, literally run it back against Tampa Bay, they've essentially allowed 2 touchdowns to every quarterback except one. So every single week, the quarterback gets 2 touchdowns. And I'm just saying, Alex Smith, yeah, I know you're going to say what, Jordan Reed or Maurice Harris, or who are they going to throw to? I'm just saying this is the kind of game that he could actually do. And another guy I like who's also way underowned that people are going to laugh at as well is Marcus Mariota. I think they're going to be behind in New England, playing from way behind, and literally you're going to see a lot of running in this game. So where everybody else picks all their favorites and plays it their way, I'm going to be stacking with some of these lower-owned guys with stacked lineups and take your money this week.
We brought David on here just to tilt Devin. Devin.
Oh, man.
If anyone says anything good about Mariota, it's just like Devin's like off for like an hour.
You're up, Devin.
Can I say one thing for Devin here?
Yeah, while he calms down.
How about strictly for Devin here, because it's kind of an internal thing we have with Footballguys. But I will say Marcus Mariota isn't even my favorite cheap AFC South quarterback.
Nice.
Because Blake Bortles is better, right, Devin?
Yeah, I like Blake Bortles this week as well.
So here's the funny thing for you guys who don't see the behind the scenes chatter that we have. At least once every month, there's a heated debate between Devin and our good friend Daniel Simpkins, who's a big Titans fan, about what Mariota could do if the surrounding cast was better, and they just kind of go after each other, and it's quite entertaining. So, Devin, you've composed yourself.
I don't know if I've composed myself, but
who do you like at quarterback?
Well, go ahead.
Can Ryan go?
Yeah, I was going to say before, let's not even do the Mariota thing, but Devin,
sure.
You're more the personnel guy, the matchups guy, the injuries guy here. Talk about why you don't like Alex Smith this week, because there are, 3 reasons at least on his offensive line why you might not want to like him, right? I mean, that's what's scaring me.
Trent Williams and Brandon Scherf, and I think there's 1 or 2 other guys look like they're going to miss. My concern is that he just doesn't throw the ball downfield. And with no offensive line, he's just going to throw the ball quick. He'll probably complete, 27 of 32 passes for 210 yards. But there are so many good matchups this week that taking 2 guys like Mariota and Alex Smith who just don't have upside. David, I love you, and you've done a lot of good things for me, but I just can't get behind that one.
This is the week Devin gets fired. That's why we bring David on.
No,
We're
I
just
didn't get fired. It's just the week Devin loses his bankroll to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So I'll go through my list here. I have a lot of guys, but none of those 2. Aaron Rodgers is probably my favorite GPP play. Miami's allowed 78% completion percentage when they don't play Sam Darnold. So in 8.8 yards per completion. So basically, Aaron Rodgers is not Sam Darnold, so I think that he's in a really good spot this week. I do like the Ryan Fitzpatrick call. The Washington secondary's fallen apart. Josh Norman's not what he used to be. Quentin Dunbar's been banged up. Over the last 5 games, they've allowed 315 yards average, which includes games to Dak Prescott and Eli Manning. So that's just indicating that, they played some really bad quarterbacks and they're still allowing a lot of yards. Cincinnati might be the worst secondary in football at this point. So if you were to take out a game script loss to Carolina where they didn't need to throw the ball, and a game where Ryan Tannehill, who's not very good, if you throw those 2 games out, they're averaging an average of 385 yards allowed passing and 15 touchdowns in 6 games. So all 6 opponents have thrown for 319 or more in those games. Wow. So Drew Brees is in a really, really good spot. And then finally, Matt Ryan, he's been 2016 Matt Ryan, and I think a lot of people haven't noticed because, they're focusing on Julio Jones not throwing touchdowns or not catching touchdowns, but he's been one of the best quarterbacks in football this year, and this Browns secondary is an absolute joke. It's Terrence Mitchell's out for the year. EJ Gaines is out for the year. Demarius Randall might not play with a groin. He didn't play last week. Denzel Ward has a hip injury. Linebackers are the same problem. Christian Kirksey's out for the year. Joe Schobert is highly questionable, and Jamie Collins is highly questionable. Their entire back 7 is either from week 1 is either out or highly questionable this week. So it's basically start all the Falcons against this Browns team.
Yeah, I love that. Matt Ryan has been as good this year as he was in his MVP season. The only difference is the team's 1-loss record. Matt Ryan is 3rd in fantasy points per drive behind Patrick Mahomes and Ryan Fitzpatrick, actually.
And I'm glad that you guys brought up sort of this New Orleans-Cincinnati game and the Washington-Tampa Bay game, because those are the 2 games that have a total over 50 where the spread isn't more than a touchdown. I feel like these are the 2 high-scoring competitive games where you could lead to some serious shootout potential.
And if you want a GPP play, I'm just going to go ahead and do it. But Baker Mayfield at 5,400, they're gonna have to throw the ball the entire game. So I know I said I wasn't going to bring him up the rest of the year, but I don't.
You said it, Devin.
So YouTube commenters are going to $100 over Alex Smith is what you're suggesting. Okay.
All day.
Yeah, I got it. I actually like Baker Mayfield. I also think the Drew Brees call is exceptional. I mean, he tops my list since week 6. Cincinnati's giving up, 27.6 points to quarterbacks, and Devin gave all those same reasons. So, I mean, true cash play, I think it is Drew Brees. You pay up, you can make it work with a bunch of other cheaper plays. But I do think some of these other, stack plays could kind of work for you.
I mean, let's go through. Go ahead.
You mentioned Matt Ryan. I mean, I think having Calvin Ridley this year has been a big boost. I mean, they haven't had like that solid third guy, I feel like, for a while. And, some other guys have put up some stats, but Ridley seems like the real deal. So that's been a big help. What were you going to say?
Let's go through who everyone's playing in cash. I think we threw out a lot of names, and I think it's difficult. And Ryan, unless you had someone else to add.
No. For me, the answer is Fitzpatrick is where I'm starting. I also.
Let me ask you a question. You're going 5,900 Ryan Fitzpatrick over 6,200 Matt Ryan and 6,300 Drew Brees on DraftKings.
I like Fitzpatrick better on FanDuel. His price is friendlier. That's tough. Those are good questions. I do like both of those guys. But the matchup's really good for Fitzpatrick, and that team, just all they do is throw. So if they are going to score what Vegas thinks they're going to score, they're going to do it via him.
I think on FanDuel, I agree with you. I think that I'm struggling with the price on DraftKings.
Yeah.
I think for me, I don't know. I tend to lean to Drew Brees just because although it's outside in Cincinnati.
Yeah. I'm also a little nervous that both of those games, especially Saints versus Bengals, I have a feeling that the Saints can end up being a little more run heavy in that game. I don't know that the Bengals keep up. It might be a close game, but it might just be lower scoring than the projection. But I really don't have a lot to support that other than kind of gut. So take that for what it's worth.
I mean, the problem is, right, so Aaron Rodgers is in a great rushing matchup, and we'll get into Aaron Jones in a second. Mm-hmm. Matt Ryan's in a great rushing matchup, and Drew Brees is in a great rushing matchup. So it's like, do you even consider just taking – I mean – I don't know.
That's why I think Ryan Fitzpatrick is such a great play this week, because Washington does shut down the run. That's what they're good at. You've got Peyton Barber and very little else who hasn't really even played great football. So I think Fitzpatrick at home, he's going to sling it. That's what he does.
All he does is throw 4 touchdowns.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm on Fitzpatrick on both.
I think I'm going Matt Ryan on DraftKings and Ryan Fitzpatrick on FanDuel.
Yeah, and I can respect that. Yeah, I think it's more of a dilemma on DraftKings for sure.
Although the weather in Cleveland's always a watch. It's supposed to be like 33 degrees, so that's something to keep an eye on. It's not supposed to be windy, but the wind can pick up very quickly.
Yeah. Let's move on to running backs. I didn't mention a couple of quarterback injuries because they're all in that Buffalo Jets game, which is by far the lowest total of the week, so no one cares. Let's talk about running backs. We've got Leonard Fournette coming back from injury, it looks like, although we'll see if he makes it through the whole game. Sony Michel is looking like he's going to come back as well. And then it looks like Chris Carson is going to be out, didn't practice on Thursday, so that might be the Mike Davis show at the Rams. And then minor impact, it looks like Giovanni Bernard might come back, although I don't know that hits Mixon's value a ton. Let's see, Ryan, why don't I pitch it to you for running backs here? Any of those situations interest you, or do you have some other running backs in mind?
Yeah, I mean, Mike Davis does if Carson is out. The only hard thing is I would assume that's a late game. So similar situation to last week where Carson was game time decision. He actually was active last week and then kind of had to go out shortly into the game. So if we don't know, it's a little tough. You can always do a late swap kind of situation, but with a running back what's Mike Davis in the low 4s on DraftKings. So it's not as though it's not as though you have another 4,300 guy just sitting around in the 4:00 session, at least not one that I can see.
And if you're going to do that, make sure to put him in the flex. I see a lot of people make that mistake that they'll put a guy, they just don't even think about it. Put him in the flex in case, something does happen, or you're in a head-to-head and you have to late swap because your opponent has him or a cash game and you're behind. So a little bit of a tidbit back to Ryan.
Yep. Great point. But he did have 8 targets last week, which I didn't know he was that kind of guy. But in a game where they're going to be behind, you would think that you could pick up some cheap PPR points in that way. But the guy at the top of the list that there's obviously Gurley, but especially on FanDuel, I really like Melvin Gordon. He's actually $100 cheaper on FanDuel than he is on DraftKings, so the price is really good there. But that's a game that, we all saw Oakland's debacle a week ago. From tonight, who knows what they're going to do going back home, but they're not nearly as good as the Chargers. Even if they play markedly better than they did last week, it's still a game the Chargers should control, and that goes through Gordon. So he's the guy, especially on FanDuel. He's kind of the locked and loaded RB1 for me. The one guy that I want, you two to either convince me or not convince me on is Dion Lewis. I'm struggling with the fact that every Titan is a value play, and I'm hearing a lot about the Titans this week. I mean, they could score 9 points in any given week, right? I don't know. I'm struggling with it. I see other guys in the mid-4s on DraftKings that I like as much or better. So I'll hand over the microphone and let you guys go on that or others.
Yeah, I think that, you brought up Gurley and Gordon. The spread between those two players is way different on FanDuel than it is on DraftKings. Only $400 apart on DraftKings makes that a much more interesting conversation. Devin, let's talk to you about some running backs.
Yeah, so Aaron Jones is probably my favorite guy. I think that, are they coming off a bye? I don't know if they are, but
that was week 7 for them, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I think that Jones is continuing to get more and more run and going up against a Miami defense. It seems like Jamal Williams comes in when they need to throw, and the past couple of games they've been behind, but I don't think that'll be a problem this week. The Dolphins have allowed 4 of the 6 lead backs they faced to go for 93 yards or more, averaging 5.9 yards per rush. So this is a unit that really isn't great, and Jones has had 14 carries last week and 12 the week before that. So he's on an upward trajectory. He did fumble last week, but I think it's time that they finally give him the main role, and they're starting to. Dion Lewis is interesting. We could talk about a revenge game. I'm not going to, but I think that Derrick Henry doesn't fit this game, right? So the reality is that Tennessee is probably going to be behind, and Dion Lewis has caught 10 passes over the last 2 games. Similarly, Duke Johnson. So Duke Johnson is more of a GPP play, and he's DraftKings only, but he caught 9 passes last week against Kansas City. I've already said that I think that the Browns will be down for most of this game, and Ryan talks every week about Atlanta and their inability to cover running backs from a receiving standpoint. So those 3 are really extremely cheap. But my favorite guy, especially on FanDuel, is Melvin Gordon, like you had mentioned. If you want to pivot off of him, Kareem Hunt's also in a really good matchup. The problem there is that Kansas City might be up so much that they just don't even need to run Hunt. They could just run whoever's behind him. Is it Spencer Ware?
Yeah.
But, yes.
Yeah. For me, it's probably Dion Lewis is my favorite. Or I'm sorry, Aaron Jones is my favorite. Dion Lewis is my second favorite. Duke Johnson is my GPP play if you're spending down.
Yeah.
And that's FanDuel specific. I think Dion Lewis is more favorable on DraftKings because his pass catching ability.
Yeah. And we finally saw Duke Johnson used the way the fans have always sort of imagined he should be used. And so maybe that's a new trend with the coaches.
Well, he caught 81 passes last year. So It's like he's reverting back to last year where he's catching, 6-7 balls a game, and he caught 9 last week. So.
Yep, exactly. David, tell us, what do you think about some of these picks, and who do you have on your list?
Yeah, I like most of the names that I've heard. It is interesting, though, if there ever was a week outside of those early weeks when he was the only running back to play Alvin Kamara, this is about as good as it gets. I mean, Cincinnati's the worst against quarterbacks. They're the second worst against running backs. And he is essentially a receiver and a running back, and he is just going to shred that offense. So, again, that's a situation I like. The Melvin Gordon thing, I'm gonna say a little bit of caution here, and I'm not saying I'm off Melvin Gordon. He's top of my boards as well. But I do think if that game gets out of hand, and Oakland has just looked awful and has a propensity to get blown out of games, I think you're going to see a lot of Austin Eckler in the second half of that game. So they did that the first time they played him, and I think if you look at up and down the number of points being put up against that Oakland, a lot of those are coming against running back 2s and 3s. I mean, teams are forcing a bunch of different backs and just continually running and passing with those backs. So, again, Melvin Gordon might get all that in the first half, makes all that moot. But I'm saying that is something to worry a little about because Austin Eckler is a talent there. And not saying I'm playing Eckler. I'm just saying I wouldn't put all my eggs in the Melvin Gordon basket. Some other guys I like, and I know this is a really tough situation, but Kansas City giving up the third most fantasy points over the last since week 6. Kansas City is 2 running backs. You got David Johnson, probably the cheapest he's going to be if he ever comes out of his slump, if that team does anything. 6,900 on FanDuel, 6,800 on DraftKings. Now that's not a popular choice, but I'm just thinking, again, an all-purpose back, probably playing from way behind. They're going to throw to him. That's somebody who can amass a lot of points in certainly in DraftKings. And then some names, just really darts that are super low owned that I'm starting to get to like a lot. Elijah McGuire, 3,400 on DraftKings. Definitely should be somebody you should think about. That's a crappy game script. I get it, but 3,400. Go back, look at the numbers, put some projections, get someone I think you'll find out that's value. Mike Davis, if Chris Carson scratches, he's going to be in most of my lineups. And then I think LaShawn McCoy is somebody also 4,500 on DraftKings. Pretty damn cheap. So again, you're getting these multi-purpose backs at prices we just haven't really seen them. Not in perfect game scripts, but again, just really, really cheap. Trying to bait you into playing them. You should have some percentage of those players at least.
And I didn't put Chris Ivory on the injury sheet, but if you're considering McCoy, keep a look at Ivory's.
That's really the McCoy thing, is if Ivory does scratch, I think that's even a better situation for his low price.
David, question for you.
Yeah.
Ito Smith or Elijah McGuire?
Yeah, I mean, I like Ito Smith as well. I mean, it's a situation, obviously, in a higher score game. But they also got Tevin Coleman. It's not like that's not a full running back by committee. It is. I just think the Jets are going to see what they've got in McGuire here, if not now, really soon.
I mean, Ito Smith, I think, has 2 touchdown upside.
He does.
Because he's getting all the goal line work, and Tevin Coleman, for whatever reason, they just don't give the ball to him there. But I prefer Smith just because I mentioned all of the running issues that the Browns have. I think Tevin Coleman's fine in DraftKings cash because, especially if this weather gets a little bit bad, but of the last 4 games, Cleveland's averaging 128 yards allowed and 2 touchdowns per game to opposing running backs.
Wow. Yeah, I don't hate that. I mean, I certainly see it. I think Elijah McGuire clearly going to get a lot more catches. So it depends. In terms of true upside, yeah, Ito Smith could score a bunch of touchdowns.
All right, guys. What do you got, Devin?
Yeah, real quick before we go, just one, we talk difference between cash and GPP a lot, and one, GPP strategy to go low owned. You want to keep the same basic roster construction of the cash guys you like, but pivot with somebody of a similar price. And so there's a lot of interesting mid 4,000s guys on DraftKings. So I'm thinking Dion Lewis at 4,600 is going to be the chalk. You can go easily to Mark Ingram at 4,500, who, speaking of two touchdown upside, if the Saints do get up in that game, there's a chance Ingram could do that. I also like Jordan Howard, even though it's not a full PPR situation on DraftKings. This is a game script that sets up well for Howard. Detroit's horrible against the run. Chicago gains.
Howard is so bad.
But it's a good situation.
Chicago gains 36% of their yards, which is the 8th highest percentage in the league via the rush, and Detroit allows 40% of their yardage, which
I'm with Devin on this one. I'm not.
I prefer Tariq Cohen because I think that Howard's going to run up the middle, and the strength of that defense is Snacks Harrison. So I think if they're going to have success, it's going to be running out wide. Jordan Howard's just 3.5 yards a carry.
It's a GPP call. It's a pivot. I mean, like I said, I'm not enthused about any Titans. I guess you guys talked me into Lewis a little bit. I was just trying to find ways.
Match him up with your Marcus Mariota for the win.
Howard does have 4 touchdowns in the last game. All right. Yeah, let's talk about some wide receivers, guys. I like the Gordon pick. I think the Gordon is the cash slam dunk this week, but there's a lot of good options out there. Let's look at wide receivers. We've got AJ Green out this week against New Orleans, so I think there's going to be a lot of guys looking at John Ross and Tyler Boyd. We've got some banged up Green Bay receivers here. Geronimo Allison is on IR with a groin injury, and then Randall Cobb was downgraded from Wednesday to Thursday. It might be nothing, but just keep an eye on that. Paul Richardson is on IR from Washington, so I think Maurice Harris is going to be a popular play against Tampa Bay. And then Sammy Watkins looks like he's not going to go this week. Those are the ones on my list. David, tell us about some receivers you like.
Yeah, some of those you kind of already mentioned. I do like, again, a lot of times when I will say cash, I am talking mostly more of a cash plus strategy, playing those in 100-man contests. And so we're looking for the upside with that. So again, if you like Alex Smith, you got to like Maurice Harris, who's cheap. And that's a situation I'm looking at. Some guys that are way, way, way below the radar. I'll throw that and leave some of the bigger names to you guys. But Green Bay giving up ridiculous amounts of points to receivers, 42 on FanDuel, 47.8 to DraftKings. Danny Amendola, throw it out there. And everybody's like, what? That's crazy. But honestly, somebody has to catch the ball in that kind of offense, or maybe they don't. But again, Green Bay and Miami game, Danny Amendola might be a guy at 5,300 of FanDuel that you can kind of get crazy and get sneaky around some other plays. New Orleans giving up crazy numbers, 46.1, 54.9 to receivers per week. Tyler Boyd is almost there alone. I mean, admittedly, John Ross, and you can think all these other things, 7,800 is it doesn't feel like Tyler Boyd should cost that much on FanDuel, but on the same token, who else going to catch the ball? So if that really does become a shootout, and again, what are they're projecting a whole lot of points for Cincinnati, right? So you got to think Tyler Boyd's going to have a pretty big game script if that plays out. So I do think the New Orleans defense, it seems like it's tightened up, but this is, again, over the last 3 weeks. So some of that was the Atlanta game. But I think it's interesting. And I think, again, Atlanta, their defense is awful. Jarvis Landry, 6,400 on FanDuel. Another guy you can kind of squeeze in your lineups pretty easily. Seems like he's going to have a ton of targets. In fact, I'm kind of looking here. I think he had – I don't even remember, but targets 10.8 per game already this season. So that's pretty crazy. Now, again, maybe not a lot of touchdown upside, but again, if you agree with Devin on Baker Mayfield, Jarvis Landry, you might get his. And then I think the one play that everybody should at least have some of your rosters with is this whole idea of Marvin Jones and Kenny Golladay on your situation. They traded away Golden Tate. This is not a premier matchup by far. But still, Chicago is giving up 13 catches, 169 yards, 0.8 touchdowns to wide receivers. And there's literally no one else that can catch the ball in Detroit, or virtually no one else. They don't need to do much. You can get that for $10,600 on DraftKings. Pencil both of those in, lock in tons of running backs, have a diverse, different roster. So it's just something I think you should have in some of your lineups this week.
Devin, you flashed up the red black eye Joe. You don't necessarily like the Detroit receiving core.
I did it last week against Minnesota, and Stafford spent more time on his back than he did actually throwing the ball.
Right.
Now they lowered the price on both of these guys, and they're tempting you.
Yeah, I don't know if I can do it.
Yeah, not tempting Devin enough.
It's another good pass rush, and I think Khalil Mack is coming back too for Chicago. So it's tough. The 10 sacks is a little bit disconcerting from last week.
Let's see, Ryan, who you got at receiver here?
I'm gonna toss one out and then kind of circle back to a question. Well, who am I going to toss out? Let's toss out. You mentioned, just because you mentioned some of the injuries in Green Bay, and it hurts me to toss out a USF Bull, but Marquez Valdez-Scantling is taking over the wide receiver 2 job in Green Bay. Randall Cobb, injured or not, he seems pretty washed at this point. Valdez-Scantling is an athlete, very tall guy. He will likely avoid the Xavier Howard coverage, which, Xavier Howard is an emerging corner that's been shadowing and doing pretty well against opposing wide receiver 1s. And anytime you can tie somebody who's 5,000, DraftKings 5,400, FanDuel playing almost all the snaps to Aaron Rodgers, I'm interested. The other question I had, just circling back to Tyler Boyd, because he's going to be chalked this week, right? Let's face it. AJ Green's a high-profile guy. He's out. Can Tyler Boyd be the wide receiver 1? And the guy's already getting 9 targets a game. Or how much more volume is there, and how much more efficiency is there?
AJ Green was getting 11 targets a game. So where are those going? That's the real question.
So if
I'm not saying
3 more, 4 more. I mean,
well, he's probably going to get 4 more, right? I mean,
I guess if this were any other matchup and he was priced where he is, there's no way that I would be going anywhere near, especially near like 100% type of thing in cash games. I mean, there's just. To me, he's not a wide receiver 1. He's done most of his damage in the slot this year. And people, I'm hearing this week about the Saints versus the slot. It is a great matchup, but who's playing outside for Cincinnati that's going to allow him to play in the slot that much?
Yeah,
Alex Erickson.
Yeah,
Alex Erickson and John Ross.
Yeah,
Alex Erickson
No,
is
but,
it's
but
like
John
5'8".
Ross is supposedly coming back. I mean,
Well,
yeah.
Ross, yes, but then presumably you need two to have one in the slot, right? So
right.
I just, I don't know.
I
To
hear
me, if it were any other matchup, I'd be a lot more skeptical. But man, he's priced. If you look at DraftKings, Tyler Boyd is priced 300 below Devontae Adams,
Right.
200 above Tyreek Hill, 400 above Keenan Allen.
I got you.
These are bona fide wide receiver ones. And
I think a name we haven't really talked about is Tyreek Hill. I think who could be in an excellent situation,
agreed.
especially if Sammy Watkins scratches, and that's one that could still happen.
Right. It doesn't look like Watkins is going to go. He didn't practice Thursday. I think if you're just a quick note on that Cincinnati thing again, John Ross is only 3,900 over on DraftKings. I think that he's more in play over there. The price spread between Boyd and Ross is much tighter on FanDuel, so I think that Ross is going to be less popular on FanDuel, but I think over at DraftKings, Ross is going to be a really populy play.
I think Cincinnati gets blown out this week.
Yeah.
I mean, if they're going to move the ball, I don't know. I mean,
So in a blowout, who gets the receptions? Tyler Boyd? I mean, that's exactly how it's going to play, right?
I think he gets like his, 6 for 80. I don't see any more upside than that, though. I mean, Marshawn Lattimore's likely going to slide to the slot because they're not going to put Marshawn Lattimore on Alex Erickson.
Right.
And Eli Apple is fast enough to keep up with John. Well, no one's fast enough to keep up with John Boyd, or John Ross.
Ross.
Apple runs a 4.39, 4.4, so like he's fast enough to. Ross, all he has is speed. Is it? I mean, I don't know. I don't see how Cincinnati consistently moves the ball against the Saints defense.
Because the Saints match up against them too well without A.J. Green.
Correct.
Yeah,
I think that's a fair concern.
Are we sure that Andy Dalton is a good enough quarterback to make not good receivers good?
No.
Right? Exactly. I'm really nervous about it. The only reason that I'm hesitant even to disagree with Cincy getting blown out is you've got New Orleans coming off of a pretty emotional high type of win at home, going out on the road in an outdoor environment that they're not as good. But
ever since the Chiefs game, it's like I don't view the Bengals as like this team that can exploit awesome matchups.
Yeah. No, it's an Andy Dalton problem. I mean,
Well, here's an indicator. Again, I run this pressure indicator. So the 22 games on this slate, the two that are in the bottom 5, New Orleans and Cincinnati. So Cincinnati is third from last. New Orleans pass rush is going to be fifth from last. So Andy Dalton is likely going to have time. And I think that favors, again, a Tyler Boyd script where they're probably playing from behind and A.J. Green's giving up 11 targets. So we'll see. But I think the upside's way more than 80 yards. I think he's going to have a lot of targets turning into catches.
The upside is definitely more than 80, but –
you just imagine him having that kind of game.
Yeah.
4 touchdowns, 80 yards, 4 touchdowns.
Let's talk about a couple other guys. Usually there's this quandary about who to choose from the Rams receiving core.
Cooper Kupp.
Is it just a Cooper Kupp pick here, or any interest in Robert Woods in this situation here? It's Cooper Kupp, it sounds like.
I love the consistency and the floor, especially if you're thinking cash games. Yeah. And his price on FanDuel is outstanding too. The 6,400 DraftKings, 6,500 FanDuel. Really
so let me ask you about. Steve has him as the second highest owned and Tyler Boyd is the 4th highest owned on FanDuel.
Yep.
Yeah. That cash game play is what I meant.
Yeah.
So,
it feels like we haven't had the Patriots on the main slate very much. Maybe I feel like they've had 4 primetime games out of their last 5 or something crazy like that. Josh Gordon at 6,000 on DraftKings. Are we looking at that at all potentially as a GPP play? No, Devin says no. What do you got there, Devin?
I don't trust Josh Gordon ever.
Are you just a bitter Browns fan, or?
I'm extremely biased, so I can't really talk about this one.
Okay. There's a lot going around this week about the whole narrative of a lot of Tennessee players and coaches used to be in New England, including one Malcolm Butler who was benched in the Super Bowl, who's been terrible this year anyway. So when stats and narratives align, that kind of helps the narrative a little bit. So, do they throw a couple extra targets Josh Gordon's way to exploit a player that used to play there? Maybe. But either way, the Patriots are going to score. Gordon is a guy who can do damage on even a handful of targets. So for a GPP play, I don't hate it.
Yeah. And speaking of Patriots players, moving to tight ends, Rob Gronkowski was limited in practice.
You skipped me for wide receivers, but okay.
What? Okay, but then hit me with some wide receivers.
Julio Jones.
Yeah. So Julio Jones scored last week. If you extrapolate his stats from last game over 16 games, that's like 2,000 yards and 16 touchdowns. So you're saying he's on pace for that, right?
I think he breaks 100 yards, but the question is he going to score in back-to-back games? There's no one on Cleveland that can defend him, and but I don't ever play him. So the guy I'm going with is Michael Thomas this week. I think he's in a tremendous spot. He's the safest guy on the board seemingly almost every week for me. So on DraftKings Cash, he's only what? He's only 600 more than Tyler Boyd. So there's no way I'm paying up $7,500 for Tyler Boyd. And on FanDuel, he's expensive. I'll give you that. But
yeah,
I think he gets his this week. I do like the Scantling call. The one under the radar guy I'm going to throw out there, and you guys are probably going to laugh at me, but DJ Chark for the Jaguars. So he's 3,600 on DraftKings. He's had eight.
No.
David with the red black eye Joe.
No, not buying it. I can see it though. Maybe, but
he's averaging four receptions per game over his last two. This team is really moving on from Keelan Cole. So DJ Chark he's 6'4", 198. He runs a 4.27 40. He's going to be going up against Pierre Desir, who's I think been cut by about 7 teams in the league over the last couple of years. And all it takes for him to pay off GPP value is to get behind. I mean, even at 8 points, which is what he had last week for 4 for 41, if he gets behind this Colts secondary, especially if Malik Hooker misses, who's looking like he's going to, I think he has big play upside. So at 3,600, get him in before everyone else does. I think it's a sneaky play.
It's definitely sneaky.
And then the guy I'm fading is Jarvis Landry. I just don't see the upside that he has for the price that.
Let's just play head to head with our cash games right now, Devin. We're bankroll against bankroll. Let's just see how.
There's not going to be any overlap, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's on.
Yeah, I mean Landry is getting targets, but he's averaging 10 yards per catch. So I mean, this is a guy who runs he ran a 4.77 40 in college, and the Browns have no one else to.
So explain to me your Baker Mayfield love. It's all going into Njoku. It must be coming.
I think it's going. Well, I mentioned Duke. I mentioned Duke Johnson.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
He had 9 catches last week, and they do get Rashard Higgins back. I think he could get 40 to 50 yards.
I gotcha.
I mean, I think that Landry could get 7 for 65, and then the question is, can he get in the end zone? And I think Josh Gordon has a lot more upside. As much as I don't like Josh Gordon, at like a very similar price.
I gotcha.
Yeah, I buy that. All right. So speaking of those Patriots, really the only tight end I have on my list is Gronkowski. Pretty much every Patriot and their water boy and everybody was limited on Wednesday and Thursday. So you never really know with these injury reports, but that's one to keep an eye on. Let's see. Devin, we'll come back to you for tight ends first since I almost skipped you on receivers.
Yeah. I feel like I've said this name almost every week this year, but Jordan Reed on FanDuel at 5,200 is simply too cheap. He hasn't done anything all year, but I mean, at some point he's going to do something.
Look at Ryan's fed up.
Yeah. So David said he liked the call, though.
I do like the call.
So Jordan Reed, or to you, is Julio Jones to me, right? I mean, the process is always there. The only thing is Julio Jones was lacking touchdowns and nothing else, and Jordan Reed is lacking everything all year.
Well, the problem. Fine.
I mean,
he's had 11.
The matchup is great this week, though.
Can I finish?
Yes.
He's had 11 catches over the last 2 weeks. So
It's trending up. Price is going down.
With the offensive line issues that the Redskins have, I think that they may one of two things will happen. They'll either keep him in to block, but he's not really a great blocker, or they will, run him short routes and Alex Smith will just dump off to him. I don't know, but the difference between him and Julio is Julio's been a top 3 priced receiver all year. If Julio Jones is ever 5,200, I would be pounding the table screaming about Julio Jones.
Right.
At 5,200, I mean, David Njoku's at 5,400. I think he's a solid cash guy on FanDuel. And for DraftKings, I think for me, I'm going with Austin Hooper. I mentioned all the issues that the Browns have at the linebacker position. I don't see any way that whether they're playing or not, they're not going to be 100%, but they're running out some scrubs out there, guys. It's really bad in Cleveland.
Sorry, buddy. David, talk to me about tight ends.
The biggest name I'm going to say, and I think the biggest key to winning your cash games this week, is to fade Travis Kelce. Absolutely fade him, and he'll be the most popular owned by far. And I'm going to say that because over the last, from week 6 on, Arizona's allowing just 5.2 fantasy points per game on FanDuel, 6.9 on DraftKings. He's priced at 8,000 on FanDuel. Got to get you 16 points, 7,000 on DraftKings. Got to get you about 21 points. And I'm just saying he's now officially at that price point where, although it's not a bad play, he may lead all tight ends. I don't think you're going to win a lot. You're going to really limit your upside in your lineups by putting him in there. So that's just a play I will not be having any. I will be 100% fading him in virtually every lineup I have this week. That's my biggest play. I think there are some sneaky guys if you want to get crazy. Now, again, if you love my Mariota call earlier, which I know everybody did.
Stop listening to this portion.
You can pair him up with Jonnu Smith on DraftKings for 2,500. So this is where I'm saying where you can get complete roster differentiation, 2 super low-owned guys. Another name I'm going to throw out there, really crazy. Got to watch the injury report, make sure he's really going to play. But James O'Shaughnessy is likely to return for Jacksonville. Again, 2,500. If you like Blake Bortles, that's a situation you could really pivot and get away. Now, I'm not saying these for cash games. I'm just saying for major differentiation plays, get in super cheap and literally build your lineup completely different than everybody else's lineup that will probably pay up because there will be a lot of Travis Kelce ownership.
I like this. John is usually our low tight end dart. He's like, all I got to do is catch a touchdown. So
I'm filling in for John.
Here. Yeah, you're doing a great job being here.
Can we go back to I missed something. Can we go back to Jordan Reed for a second?
Okay, please. Yeah.
So the reason I like him so much, and I mentioned Greg Olsen last week, but this Tampa defense cannot stop tight ends. So they allowed 6 for 76 in a touchdown last week, 9 for 71 in a touchdown earlier this year to Austin Hooper, and 4 for 112 and a touchdown, and probably ended Chris Conte's career against Tampa. And then Zach Ertz had 11 for 94. So they can't stop tight ends. Josh Perkins had 4 for 57, whoever that is. Trey Burton had 2 for 86 and a touchdown. They've allowed the second most points to tight ends. So if Reed is going to have a breakout game, if not, I'll stop mentioning this year.
No, I gave you hell for it, but it is the right play. They are last in the league in yards allowed to tight end. The process says that it's good. Your theory on blocking and versus short passes, between that and their wide receiver injuries, I could see 2 tight end sets where Vernon Davis helps to block.
Correct. Vernon Davis is their best blocker.
Agreed.
Tight end by far. So I almost think where their offensive line stands, I think you're going to see Vernon Davis on the field a tremendous amount this year.
Yep, I would agree. I had 2. If the floor can be mine, Austin, does that sound good?
Yes.
All right, 1 cash and 1 GPP play. We'll do it real quick. In his return from injury last week, the 2 weeks ago before Indianapolis's bye, Jack Doyle returned to play 73% of the snaps. He got 7 targets. Eric Ebron was back to about 23% of the snaps. How else is Indy going to move the ball? They don't run it. They pass on 65% of their neutral script plays, which is what I call plays within 7 points in between the 20s. That is a very high ratio. It's top 5 in the league. We know Jacksonville's corners are strong, although they will be missing A.J. Bouye, shout out UCF, for this game. But they allow 39% of their total yards via the rush, which is second worst in the NFL. and Indy only gains a middling 30% of their yards versus the rush. So if they're moving it, they're going to do it via the air. I like Doyle to catch at least a handful of balls, perhaps even a touchdown in a game that kind of has a surprisingly high over-under, given the fact that it involves Jacksonville. And then on a GPP standpoint, I like Trey Burton, 3,900 DraftKings, 6,100 FanDuel. The guy is a stud athlete. He's very up and down. I mean, it's the epitome of a GPP profile. But Detroit has the worst normalized strength of schedule, shout out to Austin, against tight ends over the last 5 weeks. They are only 12th worst in defense versus position, like raw DVP over that stretch, but they've faced Minnesota, who doesn't really use Kyle Rudolph much anymore, Seattle, who doesn't have tight ends, Miami, who doesn't have tight ends. They gave up 6 for 76 to Jimmy Graham and a touchdown to Lance Kendricks, and then they also faced Dallas, who doesn't have tight ends, and gave up a touchdown to them. So they've just not played anybody. So it is a much better matchup than the raw stats indicate, and Burton is a guy who can certainly get deep and make some big plays.
Yeah, I like Burton this week. Devin, you flashed up the red Black-Eyed Joe on one of Ryan's picks.
Yeah, the Jack Doyle call. So Jacksonville's been pretty good against tight ends. So they held Evan Ingram to 2 for 18, Rob Gronkowski to 2 for 15. Travis Kelce did have 100 yards against them, and then they held Zach Ertz to 4 for 26 last week. So did you say cash or GPP?
I said cash. I don't know how else Indy's going to move the ball or score. I mean, Hilton's going to get shadowed by Ramsey, presumably, right? Who else do they have? I mean, Bouye is out, but Indy doesn't really have a lot of depth at wide receiver. Andrew Luck is extremely adept at throwing to tight ends. We've seen it throughout his college and pro career. And Indy's tight ends this year, be it Doyle, Ebron, help me, Devin, who's the
Swoop.
they have even a new former basketball player. I have their page right here. Mo Ali Cox has a couple touchdowns this year. I mean, they throw to their tight ends, so no matter who it is. So
the problem is Deshaun Gibson and Barry Church are both pretty good safeties from a pass standpoint. But I can see it as a GPP call. But I mean, what at 4,300 on DraftKings, it's David Njoku's $100 less. I think his floor is a lot higher.
Yeah. Despite that goose egg game he had, I still like Njoku. Yeah. All right. Let's move on to defenses. David, tell me who you like at defense this week.
I hate defenses. I like to go cheap at defense. So
nice.
Hey, we agree on something.
Yeah, you and Devin.
Yeah, I just generally this isn't something I spend a whole lot of time with, but I mean I'll look a lot at the sack totals and stuff. You know, I don't know if I want to pay up for Chargers, but I'm leaning as that somebody I kind of like. And then I think who plays Buffalo every week is always worthwhile. So that's the Jets this week. But that's another pay up situation. So we'll see. I mean, right now, if I have the cash, I'm probably paying up for the Jets, but I typically like my defense at home. I like them to be in a winning game script, and I like them cheap. So usually once I do all the math and get to finalize numbers, I end up with a low cost defense that just plays at home.
Nice. Devin, who you got?
Yeah. I think on FanDuel I'm going Green Bay. And it's a situation where we've seen Miami go to 25-degree weather, and that's what it's supposed to be up in Green Bay this week, and struggle in the past. At 3,900 on FanDuel, I think they're in play, but you guys are going to laugh at me, but my favorite defense this week is the New Orleans Saints. 3,200 on FanDuel and 2,200 on DraftKings. I think it's another game where Kansas, similar to the Kansas City game, and you take away AJ Green, that Andy Dalton's not good enough. I mean, let's put it this way. The Saints have Marshawn Lattimore. They have Eli Apple. And we can debate Eli Apple, but he was a top 10 pick.
Right.
And like they're still a decent defense on paper that at some point they're going to turn around, you would think. And at 2,200 and what did I say? 3,200 on FanDuel, I think they're too cheap. I mean, there's not a lot out there. The Jets are a good call, but they're far too expensive. The Bears are a great GPP play at 3,600 on DraftKings, and they're 5,000 on FanDuel, so no one's going to have them. But they scored 2 touchdowns in Detroit last week, and Detroit had allowed 10 sacks to Minnesota. So if you want a GPP play, pay up for the Bears, I guess. But I'm likely going with the Saints and the Packers pretty much everywhere.
Nice. Ryan, who you got?
Yeah. Nobody mentioned – these are both GPP shots, but Jacksonville. It's a super talented defense. I think this might be the only time I've seen them under 3,000 on DraftKings. Sure, they're on the road, but Indy passes a lot, and that's what we like. We like defenses facing passing teams. You get more sacks, you get fumbles, interceptions, all the above. That's how our defenses score points. And I just argued for how will Indy move the ball, and my answer was Jack Doyle, and it wasn't even well received. So if we do the math there, maybe they don't move the ball. Maybe they get sacked a lot. Maybe they throw some interceptions. The other one, and I know that's not going to show very well on David's pressure rating, but I don't think that accounts for the offensive line injuries. Tampa Bay is site minimum $2,000 on DraftKings. So I might actually like New Orleans better at just 200 more based on the case Devin laid out. But 3-0 line injuries, $2,000. The only, real hesitation is just that Alex Smith doesn't have the, bravado to actually make tight throws and therefore throw interceptions to get that defense points. But we'll see. I mean, Washington is signing people off the street to play offensive line. So it's a bad situation there. And then one last semi-cheap one I like is the Rams, just because I'm always gravitated to a double-digit favorite at home. Seattle's another team, doesn't turn it over a lot, doesn't like to pass a lot. This game script may make them pass a little bit more, and Russell Wilson threw a pick six last week, if I'm not mistaken. So double-digit favorite at home, 2,400 DraftKings, worth a shot.
Yeah, I got one more that I probably should have mentioned was the New England Patriots, especially on DraftKings, 2,700.
But Mariota.
Yeah, well, that's just it. You're buying into it or you're not buying into it. But Tennessee.
He's horrible.
Tennessee is giving up 5.7 sacks per game over since week 6. I just think Mariota is going to run for a lot in that you're going to be scrambling for his life, but also get some of those run things. So the sacks don't come against his numbers, but it could still be a good defensive play. But 2,700 on DraftKings, very, very cheap. You can have that defense, a big favorite game. They don't usually rush the passer, but then again, that could be just all kinds of interceptions when Mariota's behind center. So
if you're playing the Sunday, Monday slate, and Austin's going to get mad at me that we're not talking about the main slate, but I don't care. The Eagles defense is probably one of my favorites. Dak Prescott has fumbled 5 times in the last 3 games and he's taken like 10 sacks in the last 3 games, 12 sacks in the last 3 games. So the Eagles defensive line is going to tear this Cowboys offensive line apart. 5 fumbles in 3 games. That's shocking.
That's horrible.
Yeah. All right. Let's see, Ryan. Let's come back to you and talk about stacks. Those defenses this week might be a little tougher to pick because of the high Vegas totals, but the stacks should be aplenty with the high Vegas totals. Who you got?
Yeah, I got a couple. One, slightly thin, the other extremely thin. So we'll start with the better one first. And it's Ryan Fitzpatrick and a bounce back game from Mike Evans. He had his lunch eaten by, what's his first name? But Bradbury for Carolina last week. Evans didn't do anything, but he did play 90% of the snaps. He did have 10 targets. Washington allows the 5th highest ratio of passing yards, as a ratio of total yards. 74% of their yards are via the pass. Tampa gains 80% of their yards via the pass, which is by far the highest in the league.
You have the wrong receiver.
Nah, he's bouncing back.
Adam Humphries is the right receiver in Tampa.
No, he's bouncing back.
15 catches in his last 2 games and he's 3,900 on DraftKings.
Evans is bouncing back. Humphries is not a 2-touchdown profile guy. Mike Evans is. So
he scored 2 touchdowns last week.
Yeah, he used them all up.
But he's not that guy. I just don't see it happening again.
He has more touchdowns than Julio Jones, and you tout Julio Jones every single week.
Julio finally turned it around.
Every week.
Yeah.
To steal your line from before, can I finish?
No.
The second
Adam Humphries.
The second stack I like, you're not going to like either. Shocker. We've mentioned you guys each mentioned a Jacksonville pass catcher, and neither were Dante Moncrief. Dante Moncrief is 19th in the NFL in terms of market share of team air yards. He sees 32% of Jacksonville's air yards, and like Devin said, they're phasing out another receiver, Keelan Cole, who had been, kind of sharing the load there before. So I think Moncrief is a little bit more proven. He's also facing his old team, if you're into that sort of thing. And he's a pivot away from Corey Davis, who we didn't talk about, but I have kind of seen popping up all over articles this week.
All right. Devin's just going to shake his head.
Blake Bortles and Dante Moncrief obviously was the stack.
Right. Yeah. That's hopefully who will be throwing it to him.
Hopefully.
Yikes.
Devin's going to think about that for a second. David, we're going to ask you about your stacks.
Yeah, Fitzpatrick Evans, that's my top stack of the week, so I agree there. Again, I'm watching the Sammy Watkins news. If he truly scratches, I love Tyreek Hill, and that's a great situation. So, again, if I'm going to fade Kelsey, you can have some of that ridiculous offense. You got to pay up for Mahomes, so you get a pretty good price with Tyreek Hill. The crazy ones, I've talked about a little bit. I like Bortles, O'Shaughnessy, and then I like Mariota Jonas-Smith. Again, super, super, super cheap. I like Alex Smith, Maurice Harris, super cheap. Again, cash plus lineups. I'll be taking your guys' money this week.
Devin disagrees with everything that's been said in the stacks.
I know.
Or hit me with what you like.
Yeah, I don't know where to go from here, but one of my favorite ones, and you guys are going to laugh at me, and that's okay, but you could get basically any receiver and any running back that you wanted if you had the nerve to go with Josh McCown and Quincy Enunwa.
Yeah, I get it.
I don't.
Josh McCown's a significant upgrade over Sam Darnold. Like he's night and day better quarterback.
No disagreement there. Buffalo's defense is actually okay. The total in that game is 36.
Right, but Tre'Davious White is probably going to be on Robbie Anderson because Buffalo doesn't have anyone fast enough to cover Anderson if it's not White, and their second corners haven't been great this year. So as a complete dart play, he has more upside. McCown has more upside than Mariota. Like, let's be honest here.
No disagreement from me.
Not a chance at all.
But Devin, the
not
logic,
even in the same ballpark.
The logic is good. The upside is where you lost me. But the logic is there.
I think Devin starts with a team total that adds 20 points to come up with his GPP play.
It's $8,000 total. If he has 250 and 2 touchdowns and Enunwa scores a touchdown, you're already there. Like it's $8,000 total on DraftKings. On FanDuel, I'm not doing it because FanDuel we can find salary elsewhere. But
right.
For $8,000, you can literally get whatever top end running back, whatever receiver, whatever defense. Like you could just run the board with the top end guys. You could get Melvin Gordon and Kareem Hunt in there. But like I said, it's a one that I'll throw 1 or 2 lineups in there with McCown and Enunwa just for fun. My top stack of the week is Drew Brees and Michael Thomas. I talked about Cincinnati's ineptitude to cover anybody this year. If you wanted to go, I wish Dez Bryant was on the slate because he's going to score a touchdown this week, but he's not. And then, like I said, Ryan Fitzpatrick and Adam Humphries. Humphries is averaging 79 yards over his last 2 games, 15 catches, and on DraftKings they haven't changed his price nearly enough. And I feel like John, because I'm normally the FanDuel guy, but I seem to be the DraftKings. I seem to be leaning towards DraftKings cheap receivers and cheap running backs this week. And Baker Mayfield and Duke Johnson's my last one. I think Duke has 10 catch upside. I don't like Jarvis Landry. I don't like any of the Browns receivers. I like Njoku and I like Duke Johnson.
I mean, in general, FanDuel's pricing is a little bit softer. So when you're digging for some of those deeper, cheaper plays, you're generally trying to find value on DraftKings so that you can load up on other guys. FanDuel.
But I think a lot of those guys are in really good spots this week. And like a lot of the times we're really digging deep. Like Maurice Harris is in a good spot. I think Enunwa's in a good spot. I think Adam Humphries. I think at running back, Dion Lewis, Mike Davis. I think Mark Ingram's fine. Like the list goes on and on. But it's one of those weeks where there's the quarterbacks that are intriguing aren't guys that have that 1 or 2 targets that they're throwing to. They're throwing to 4, 5, 6 different guys. So it's really a hard week, but I think the advantage is had on DraftKings this week.
Yeah, and I think that Breeze Thomas stack is a great cash game stack. We talk about a lot of GPP stacks, but that's safe enough that it's a cash game stack for me. All right, let's move on to parting thoughts. Let's see, Ryan, any last words of wisdom? Any guys that you didn't get a chance to mention?
No, I just want to kind of test John to see if he listens back to the show by touting his article, because it's also really good. It's more that than the testing of John, but it comes out every Saturday, I think, John's Tips and Picks article. It is super duper long, but that's because it's super duper long on really good information. He lists players at every position, ranks them by cash, by GPP. So it's not just a good, solid kind of start of a player list, but the explanations he gives for each one. Sometimes I even rank them differently than he does based on his own explanations, because he does a good job of laying it all out. So, and then in the beginning of the article, it has usually has a good strategy piece that you can carry for more than just that week. It's more of a game theory global thing. So shout out to John. We miss you this week. Safe travels.
It's funny. The way you set it up, I thought you were going to say something bad about him to see if he paid attention and then came after you. So, I wasn't sure if you were going to say something about his weird dog pillows or his headphones that look like earrings, but you didn't say any of that. So
I should have.
You're very, very good of you. Devin, hit us with your words of wisdom, your parting thoughts.
I'm very glad John is gone this week.
So mean.
And the reason I say this is because David and I have gone back and forth the entire show, and it's been fun.
It's been good.
Thank you, David, for coming on. It's always a pleasure. Even it's all in good fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
Don't fire me.
Never, man.
And my last thought of the week is Ryan Fitzpatrick. Don't play him on DraftKings. Play him on FanDuel if you like him. There's a number of guys that are similar this week. Really carve out. If you only play on FanDuel, maybe take a look at DraftKings. And if you only play on DraftKings, maybe build a lineup on FanDuel, because some of the guys that you actually like, what's the tool that you have? Evaluator?
The Evaluator tool will tell you which site it's the better site to play your favorite players on.
So really you should be playing on, you should have an account for both. And if there's a guy that you've listened to tonight, or you're reading an article and you really like, look at that tool and it will tell you which site to play him on, essentially, because whatever site he's cheaper on, that's the site you should be playing. If there's a guy that you're absolutely in love with, like Ryan Fitzpatrick, or if you want to play Matt Ryan, I prefer him on DraftKings because of his price. So that's all. That's all I got.
I love it. David, any final thoughts from you? Any last plays you want to mention?
One of the things, and you don't see it talked a lot about, so I thought I would mention, is just a general strategy from about this point forward is really looking at win-loss records from NFL teams. So you start getting these teams with 2 wins, 3 wins, and they're out of it. And literally all of a sudden we're saying, oh, but he had this target share, and all of a sudden, why did they throw in this new guy? Well, you're going to see more and more of that kind of happen. So again, I think winning records is a bigger thing, especially in cash games, where you don't want to load up with a lot of guys on losing records, because all of a sudden the game script doesn't go anywhere near what we think it's going to go. So again, there are 12 teams with at least 4-4 records, at least 500 records this week on the main slate. Look to put a lot of your guys. I mean, not just look at the high Vegas totals, but also look for teams with winning records that are playing for something, that'll play to every minute, that'll use that last 2 minutes of every half, against teams that are just literally some are just literally going through the motion. So again, in terms of play volume, all that kind of stuff, to get your guys to get maximum targets, look for winning records.
Yeah, the phone-in factor increases as the season goes on, for sure, too. All right, that's what we got for our show. For our latest content, go over to footballguys.com. We'll be back next Friday. John Lee will be back next Friday for our Week 11 episode. So on behalf of our special guest, David Dodds, as well as Ryan Hester and Devin Knotts, I'm Austin Lee, saying thank you for watching, and thanks for being a football guy. To check out our content at footballguys.com, click the button on Devin's face. To subscribe to our YouTube channel, be sure to click on the button on John's face. And if you'd like to see our latest video, click on the giant video in front of Ryan's face. Click any of those now. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening.